So this is going to be your tutorial on CB9, which is ecosystems and material cycles. So ecosystems and material cycles. We're going to start off looking at different levels of organisation. So here I've got an undersea theme. So the first one is an organism. An organism is a single living thing. So an organism is a single living thing. A population is all of the organisms of the same species. So in this diagram here, it would be these two are the same, these two are the same, and then the turtles, it's the same species. So there's a population of 2 of these fishes and a population of 2 of these fishes. So that is all the organisms of the same species. A community then is all the different populations in an area, so it's all of the different populations in the area. And then the ecosystem is all the living and non-living components of an area. So all okay. So the other part of that is a habitat is where something lives, and that's that. That's the different levels of organisation. We're now going to talk about the different factors that can affect an ecosystem. So they can be living or non-living. If they're living, they're otherwise known as biotic factors. So biotic factors are living. These are things like prey, competition or competitors, and predators. Non-living things are known as abiotic factors. So there's just an A in front of it. So abiotic factors, and those are things like light, temperature, humidity, rainfall, oxygen levels, pollution, wind, anything that is non-living. So living factors are called biotic, that's your prey, competition and your predators. Non-living is abiotic, and that's your wind, light, temperature, oxygen levels, humidity and rainfall. So the next bit is parasitism. So parasitism is where a parasite feeds off another organism. The host is harmed and the parasite benefits. So if you think about nits in your hair, the nits feed on your blood, so they gain nutrients, but you don't benefit at all. So this is where something feeds, so a parasite feeds off of the host. The host is harmed, but the parasite benefits. So that could be things like fleas, lice, tapeworm. So if you go and have a look at some videos of tapeworms, you'll see that they grow in the intestines, and they are long and basically feed off the nutrients that you have, and you gain nothing from them. So a parasite feeds off its host, but the host is harmed and the parasite benefits. Mutualism. This is where two organisms live together and they benefit one another. So the clownfish and the anemone is normally toxic to most fish, but the clownfish is not affected by the toxins, so it has somewhere safe to live, and the anemone lives off the waste of the clownfish. So the mutualism then is when two organisms live closely together in a way that benefits each other. So this is the clownfish and anemone. Other examples would be the oxpecker and antelope. So the oxpecker is a bird which eats the ticks off the antelope. So the oxpecker gets somewhere to live, and the antelope no longer has a parasite living on it. So it's a mutualistic relationship. So sampling can be done using a quadrat, and you can place your quadrat randomly in an area and work out the average population of a species. So that's where you go out and you throw your quadrat over your head. It's a metre by a metre. So if you have a quadrat, it's 1 metre by 1 metre squared. And it's used to sample the living things in a habitat. So okay, so quadrat is used to sample your living things in your habitat. You're going to place the quadrat random. So place randomly. Count / estimate population. And then you're going to use an equation which can tell you the number of a population of organisms in the area. So it's mean number of organisms in one quadrat times total area divided by area of one quadrat. And these are metres squared. Another part of sampling is this belt transect. So this is how you can do the abiotic and biotic factors and analyse their effects of equal distances away from the tree. So this is a belt transect, and this is testing abiotic / biotic factors. So you do that every a metre away from the tree and look at the different organisms and what habitats different populations may prefer. Okay, so the next bit we're going to talk about is the human effect on the ecosystem, starting with the non-indigenous species. The non-indigenous species are organisms that are not naturally found in that area, so they're introduced, they can then reproduce, and then they're competing against the locals for resources. So this is an example of when humans brought grey squirrels to the UK. They reproduced rapidly and outcompeted the native red squirrel, and now our red squirrels in the UK are endangered. So introducing a non-indigenous species can mean that the native species suffer and may even die out. Another human effect on the ecosystem is fish farming, and this is where fish are kept in big tanks like this for reproduction and then going on to sell for food. And so this is one type of fish all kept in one tank, and that has problems because it can produce a lot of waste, which then can create pollution and changes to the local conditions. It can also cause diseases from farmed fish into the local population, and then it can spread amongst the wild fish. So fish farming is the growing of one kind of fish in an area or tank. Problems: waste can pollute, changes to local conditions, and the last one is diseases. So diseases spreading through the tank will actually kill off all the fish. Diseases spreading outside the tank will kill off the other local fish in the area. Effect on ecosystems by humans is eutrophication. That is where fertilisers are added to our crops, and as it rains they run off into our rivers and streams, adding lots of nitrates and phosphates into the water. Now algae love them and will then start to grow and reproduce as they have more nutrients. That algal bloom will block the sunlight in the river or in the lake. That means the plants at the bottom are going to die because they have little sunlight to photosynthesize. Other organisms will start to die as bacteria decompose and use the oxygen in the lake, which produces stagnant water. So it's going to cause a lack of biodiversity as lots of organisms and plants die out. So that's eutrophication, adding fertilisers to our crops, which run off, causing algal bloom and killing off the plants and organisms in the rivers and lakes. So biodiversity is very important, and what that means is it's all the different plants and animal life in the world or in a habitat. They're important because all the different plants and animals are interdependent of one another, so we need to be able to maintain the biodiversity in an area. So what that looks like is how and why. So we're maintaining it by preventing extinction. Why? Because different species are useful, so different plants become different drugs. So if we can find new drugs with new plants, that's excellent. We need all the different plants and animals in the ecosystem to make sure it survives. Aesthetic survival, that is how pretty everything looks. And then we've got moral and ethical reasons. What right do we have to actually kill off a species or destroy a habitat? Biodiversity is also important, so that if there are diseases, it doesn't wipe out the whole population or globe. If we have lots of different species, then it means that if there is a disease, it may just take out one species and not everything. If we have lots of genetic variation within a species, it may just mean that a certain variety of a species is killed off by a disease rather than the whole species. So having lots of biodiversity is important, so that we can survive and keep thriving. It's also important as different varieties or species will have different properties, and different properties are needed for different things. So one way that we can increase biodiversity is reforestation. So reforestation is going to be where you replant forests that have been destroyed. That then restores habitats, it will conserve species, it will reduce the CO2 and increase the oxygen in the air. Also, tree roots will bind soil together and prevent erosion, and it will then affect the local climate, reducing the temperature variation. So, reforestation is planting, or should I put replanting, forests that have been destroyed. So that restores habitats, conserves species, reduces CO2, increases O2, binds soil, stopping erosion, and affects local temperatures. So that is replanting our forests that have been destroyed. So there are major impacts of this, and keeping our biodiversity and increasing the habitats that we have, increasing our species and increasing the biodiversity. The carbon cycle is looking at how carbon cycles through the environment and is kind of kept in the system. So first of all, if we start with the trees over here, they respire, which gives out carbon dioxide, which produces it into the air, but they also photosynthesize, so they take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Now, if they die, they can either go through and be decomposed by bacteria. Bacteria respire, which puts CO2 into the air, but dead material that's not broken down by decomposers can eventually become fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are then burnt via combustion, and that produces carbon dioxide, so it puts carbon dioxide into the air. Now, combustion is becoming more of a problem as we're doing more and more burning, and there is more human impact as the demand for fossil fuels becomes bigger. The other part of the carbon cycle is the animals. So animals will respire, which produces carbon dioxide. They also eat plants and animals, so they take in carbon that way by feeding. And they are part of the death cycle, where they will be decomposed by bacteria, which produce carbon dioxide via respiration. The water cycle then is how the water moves between different parts of our planet. So, water. So what we've got then is, if we have our seawater here, we get evaporation as the heat from the sun warms up the ocean, it evaporates. That then rises, so the water rises, and as it cools, it condenses, forming clouds. So as our water rises, it cools, and then it condenses. That forms our clouds, which then means it rains or precipitates. The rain then hits the ground and it will run off. So it runs off through rivers, streams, into groundwater, and eventually it will join the sea again. So we've got this big cycle here of the sea evaporating, condensing, and then rain, and then running off. Now, we also need to know how to use this as drinking water. So in chemistry you will have looked at distillation. So drinking water is known as potable water. So if it's potable, it is drinking water. And if we are removing the salt from it, we cannot drink salt water because it will actually dehydrate us more. So we have to desalination. We have to go through this process of desalination, which is removing salt from water. So desalination, removing salt. And that is the water cycle. So the last part of this module is the nitrogen cycle, and once again this is how nitrogen is moving through different parts of the planet and through the environment and system. So we have a lot of nitrogen gas in the air, and that can be used by nitrogen fixing bacteria, which puts nitrates into the soil. Now that can also happen when lightning strikes. Plants use the nitrogen in the soil, or the nitrates, as nutrients for growth. Animals then feed on plants, which moves the nitrates into the animal. As the animal dies or excretes, that produces urea, which puts it back onto the ground. Decomposes and bacteria will break down this urea into ammonium compounds. Ammonium compounds are used by our nitrifying bacteria to put nitrates back into the soil. Now, nitrates in the soil can also be broken down by bacteria, which releases nitrogen gas to the air. Some plants can use nitrogen gas if they have root nodule bacteria, and that means that they can convert nitrogen straight away to be used as nitrates in the plant.